Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Tuesday, July 27th, 2021, and today we're going to be talking about the 2022 Senate elections, primarily focused on the retirements and potential retirements that we have to see coming up in these midterm elections. Now, currently speaking, there are a number of Senate races in the 2022 midterms, 34 total Class 3 Senate seats that we will be seeing a competitive election or not so competitive election, but point being that we are going to have a race in exactly 34 states. In addition, we already know that 5 senators are retiring. We have Pat Toomey from Pennsylvania, Richard Burr from North Carolina, Rob Portman from Ohio, Richard Shelby from Alabama, and Roy Blunt from the state of Missouri. Beyond those 5, we know that every other incumbent has decided that they will be running for re-election, except for a couple, 4 senators in particular, who have not given us an answer or even addressed it in some cases as to whether or not they will be running for re-election in 2022. Now, 3 of these are expected names that we've been talking about on routine when discussing potential retirements. Patrick Leahy from the state of Vermont, Ron Johnson from the state of Wisconsin, and Chuck Grassley from the state of Iowa. But another name that might actually come across as a familiar senator name is Lisa Murkowski, the Alaska Republican senator who is very well known for her more moderate positions on the Republican Party and her voting record. She has yet to announce whether or not she is seeking re-election. So with 4 people, 3 Republicans, 1 Democrat, yet to confirm or deny that they are running in 2022, we have to still wait and see. Now, while the electoral implications aren't too heavy in 2 or maybe 3 of these states, depending on what you would consider to be heavy in terms of electoral weight, Ron Johnson is certainly going to have the most competitive Senate race out of all of them, especially when it comes down to overall balance of power. The Democratic Party is heavily vying for the state of Wisconsin, but they're not really doing much to win Vermont. They know they already have that race solidly down. In Alaska, really, this race is going to end up between a Republican and another Republican, and then in the state of Iowa, Chuck Grassley really isn't going to face too much opposition at this point. So, looking at the 2022 Senate elections, we can actually take a look at our current Senate composition. You can see here all 34 races that are up in 2022, and there are 50 Democrats, 50 Republicans. Now, this Senate composition should not be news to you. Right now, Vice President Kamala Harris is the single factor as to why the Democratic Party has the majority in the United States Senate. She has broken the tie multiple times and continues to do so, and because the Vice President does break the tie in a 50-50 split Senate, the party that the Vice President is registered under has the majority if they have 50 seats. So, right now, this is our Senate map, and I'm going to add in the states where we have yet to announce senators. We have the state of Wisconsin, we have the state of Vermont, we have the state of Alaska, and the state of, I believe, Iowa. I was missing it for a second. I can't believe I forgot where Iowa was after years of looking at it. But 4 seats that we don't know whether or not these incumbents are going to run. And yes, the incumbency factor does hold heavy weight in the United States Senate and will hold heavy weight in these individual Senate races. While it won't matter much in a state such as Vermont, which overwhelmingly went to Joe Biden, it certainly will in Iowa, certainly will in the state of Wisconsin, and certainly will in the state of Alaska. Looking at Lisa Murkowski in 2010, she won by a plurality. In 2016, she won by a plurality. Now that ranked choice voting is put forth, we will see an eventual case where one of these winning candidates in Lisa Murkowski's Senate race must win by a majority. There is no longer that plurality victories that's possible in the state of Alaska. Ranked choice voting now makes it so somebody has to reach a majority by the final round. While that isn't implemented in Wisconsin and Iowa, those races might end up being competitive. But let's go ahead and take a look at every single state on an individual level. We'll probably focus on the state of Vermont earlier on just because it's the more safer race, the one that is the least competitive out of the 4, but still we should wait and see because Patrick Leahy is still a powerful Democrat in the United States Senate. So looking at the Democratic candidate list here, there are plenty of people that seem to be under the potential column as to whether or not they would run for United States Senate in the state of Vermont. While Patrick Leahy hasn't been too open about whether or not he's going to run, he certainly has been goading on the press. We can see here that he signaled that he was running for a 9th Senate term in 2021, in fact, pointing out and asking for money to fundraise against a potential Republican opponent. So while he has not announced officially that he is running for United States Senate, seems to be treating the race as if he is. Now, this would be his 9th term. This would be one of the longest-serving United States senators in United States history. Patrick Leahy is one of the oldest Democrats in the United States Senate, so there's a lot of speculation as to whether or not age will come into consideration if he decides to run or not. But outside of him, there are plenty of other Democrats that could take his place. You have Molly Gray, the Lieutenant Governor of Vermont. You have T.J. Donovan, the Attorney General of Vermont. You have Becca Polint, the President pro tempore of the Vermont Senate. You have Jim Krawinski, the Vermont House of Representatives Speaker. You have the former Lieutenant Governor of the state of Vermont. You have many people that are notable names, at least on the more left-wing, more liberal side of the Democratic Party, that are considering, or not necessarily considering, but are under consideration as potential replacements for Patrick Leahy if he decides not to run. You can expect a very competitive Democratic primary in Vermont if he decides not to, but not necessarily a very competitive general election. Phil Scott, the governor who won back in 2016, 2018, and 2020, they have 2-year terms, so they get reelected and run for reelection every 2 years. He has declined to run for the Republican primary, and now there are absolutely 0 Republicans registered to run against the Democrats in the state of Vermont. Why? Well, if you look at the electoral history, it simply isn't a state that the Republican Party, at least at this point, views fighting for. While they used to have a lot of heavy favor in the state of Vermont, in fact, Bill Clinton was the first Democrat to win Vermont in decades in 1992. It has since turned into a Democratic stronghold, and you can see here from the Cook Political Report, from Inside Elections, from the Sabatos Crystal Ball, that it is a solid Democratic characterization. It really does not matter if Patrick Leahy decides to run or not, just more so of an indication as whether or not, this one senator would be a continuation of a long-term legacy in Washington, D.C., or if Vermont will have a freshman senator in the winter of 2023. So moving on to the next Senate race, we have the state of Alaska, which would be arguably the least competitive in terms of chance of Democratic victory, but still a very competitive state. Now, a little bit of background. Lisa Murkowski was appointed by her father to a United States Senate position. She went on to win her election again by a plurality. 2010 rolls around. She loses the Republican nomination for governor, ends up running a write-in campaign and wins against her Republican and others' opponents, ends up winning by a plurality in 2010. In 2016, she decides to run in the state of Alaska again. Her former opponent from 2010, who primaried her successfully, Joe Miller, runs as a Libertarian, receives 29% of the vote. She receives 44% of the vote and wins by a plurality. So fast forward to 2022, what's different about Lisa Murkowski? Not much in terms of the percent of support for the GOP in the United States Senate, but more so her opposition towards President Trump. Now, President Trump has made it a very personal thing to get rid of Lisa Murkowski in the state of Alaska, which is why I think she might be holding off as to whether or not she has decided to run. The fact that she hasn't given an answer makes it known that she has not necessarily arrived at a decision or a conclusion that she would actually win under the circumstance running against President Trump himself. Essentially, President Trump is the first president or first presidential contender that has committed to visiting the state of Alaska in over 2 decades. I mean, you're talking about this not even being heard of in the 21st century. The most you would see is maybe Sarah Palin in the state of Alaska during the 2008 presidential election. Beyond then, Alaska seems to be an afterthought for both Democrats and Republicans. And considering it comes in around 1 a.m. Eastern time on poll closings, it's one of the last states that you ever worry about, and it's never really been competitive. But in the 2020 election, Alaska actually only voted for Donald Trump by just around 10 percentage points, which I found to be quite interesting, but that's not why Lisa Murkowski has not decided whether or not she's going to run. I think it's largely due to the fact that Kelly Tshibaka, the former commissioner of the Alaska Department of Administration, has been endorsed by President Trump. I think that Lisa Murkowski might be thinking that she will be in a position where she loses her eventual race to a Republican. Now, the thing about ranked choice voting, though, is that it is a very tricky position. We will be now in an eventual runoff race between a Democrat and a Republican, or potentially between a Republican and a Republican. It's not a top 2 runoff election, but rather a continuation of multiple rounds for voters to rank their candidates and end up allocating their votes to a final candidate by the final round, assuming none of their other picks are in the top few. So Alaska is holding their first election under a brand new system in 2022. Maybe Lisa Murkowski is apprehensive, but I still want to see what happens in the state of Alaska. She did, I told you, won by a plurality back in 2016. We still have to wait and see what happens in this state, but only time will tell, and Lisa Murkowski might get there sometime sooner than us. So then moving on to the next state that I want to talk about is the state of Iowa, where the factor of the incumbency holds a lot of weight. If you remember Iowa in the 2020 presidential election, Donald Trump won this state by just around 7 points. And while that was a large victory for Donald Trump, it wasn't enough to say that this state is solid for the GOP. But under Chuck Grassley, it absolutely is. In 2016, Chuck Grassley won the state of Iowa with 60% of the vote to Patty Judge at 36%. Despite Donald Trump winning the state by just around 9 points in 2016, Chuck Grassley wins by nearly 25. In fact, by 25 points if you decide to round up from 24.5 to 25. So Chuck Grassley holds a very significant electoral advantage across the state of Iowa, and actually 2016 was his narrowest margin of victory since his first election. His narrowest margin of victory was a nearly 25-point margin, while Chuck Grassley likely will face more opposition in the general election just simply due to his old age. I mean, Chuck Grassley has been serving and representing the state of Iowa for a third of the state's history. That's how long Chuck Grassley has been involved in Iowa politics. Beyond that, with his experience and also old age, the Iowa public seems to have turned on him. It seems that the majority of the state does not want him to run for re-election and would consider voting for somebody else. But to be a completely a realist about this situation, Chuck Grassley, even with many people saying they do not want him to run, will still likely win the election, just maybe by not as much as 2016. But we still have to see what happens in the state of Iowa. Chuck Grassley will give us an answer, he says, a year to 8 months before his primary in 2022. So that primary probably will be occurring sometime around April, May, June. So he seems to be running out of time just a little bit because he should be announcing whether or not he's deciding to run, but he still has a little bit of time to go before he has reached that commitment deadline where he needs to tell the voters whether or not he's going to run. Otherwise, another Republican might take his place. Because right now, Jim Carlin, a state senator, actually has announced that he's running for United States Senate, did this in February 15th, 2021. Many other Democrats and Republicans had already announced that they were running for re-election. And under the potential list here, you have a U.S. representative from Iowa's 1st District, and then you also had the former acting U.S. Attorney General, 2 Republicans that potentially could be running instead of Chuck Grassley if he decides to push off even longer. And the final state we're going to be talking about is the state of Wisconsin. This is a state where Ron Johnson, the Republican senator here, hasn't exactly had a very large electoral advantage, even as the incumbent. While Patrick Leahy was here winning by nearly 30 points, Chuck Grassley winning by nearly 25 points, Lisa Murkowski winning by 15 points, Wisconsin has always been close. Wisconsin was close in the 2020 presidential election, Wisconsin was close in the 2016 presidential election, and it was close in the 2016 Senate election. Ron Johnson defeated Russ Feingold. Russ Feingold actually held this Senate seat in the past. Ron Johnson defeated him by just around 4 points. So in the state of Wisconsin, Ron Johnson doesn't exactly have this 25-point margin as seen in Chuck Grassley or Patrick Leahy, or a 15-point margin as Lisa Murkowski, but he does seem to have some type of advantage. However, the times have certainly changed in the state of Wisconsin. In 2016, Donald Trump won the state, and then in 2020, Joe Biden won the state. In addition, Ron Johnson told us before that he was not going to run for re-election. This was when he was running for Senate back in 2016, running for a second term, pledging to retire after serving his second term. Walked back on that in 2019, walked back on it again after the election, saying that under consideration in which Democrats have a trifecta, he does not know if he can consciously leave the United States Senate, but seems to be hinting towards that more now, saying that leaving office is his preference now, coming out just a few days ago saying that he wouldn't be the best candidate for 2022. It seems that Ron Johnson wants to say everything but he's retiring and is dropping multiple hints that he is going to be out of the United States Senate on his own terms. But in Wisconsin, the Democratic Party is so heavily invested. You can see here the Cook Political Report ranks it as toss-up. Inside Elections ranks it as battleground. And the Sabatos Crystal Ball ranks it at most lean Republican. And that was last updated in March of 2021. The rest, June and July. And the polling data seems to indicate that Tom Nelson, the Democratic nominee, potential one, could actually do well in the state of Wisconsin. Another thing that might be pushing Ron Johnson off and off and off. While he made the original commitment to not run for re-election in 2020, 2022. Again, circumstances are different. When he made that promise, the Democratic Party only had control of the White House and did not have control of really anything else. Republicans had control of the House, they had control of the Senate. So to go from that, with Trump actually winning in 2016, to now a Democrat in the Oval Office, to Democrats in the majority in the House chamber, to Democrats in the majority in the Senate chamber, it certainly is a very different circumstance than when this promise was made. However, a promise is a promise, but we all know that politicians do like to change history, and they are revisionist, and in this case, Ron Johnson is being as such. So we will wait and see from Ron Johnson. He is the most anticipated potential candidate for 2022 because his race holds a lot of weight given the recently competitive circumstances in those states. Democrats probably won't lose the state of Vermont. Republicans probably won't lose the state of Alaska and also the state of Iowa. But in Wisconsin, it really is anybody's game at this point. So I'm excited to see what happens with the rest of the senators. They seem to be in a position where they need to announce sometime in the immediate future. As primary elections are sometimes less than a year away, they need to be able to be clear about whether or not they're going to be running for re-election in 2022. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch and then a playlist for my 2022 Senate election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.